Boy, the Tylenol and Motrin companies are going to hate this video. Hey, I'm Dr. Ken Berry, a family physician. There are a few things that a person, a parent, a mom can worry about more than fever in someone they love. And anytime that something like this is worrisome, lots of myths spring up about that topic, and fever is no exception. I'm going to be telling you in this video 10 myths about a fever that are absolutely false, that are completely unhelpful, and will only cause you to be giving yourself or your loved one medication that they don't really need. Now, we all think we know most things, but I guarantee you, you believe one or two or three of these myths about fever. So let's go through the list, and I want you to tell me in the comments how many of these you believed before you watch this video. Number one, treating a fever makes whatever infection you have go away quicker. You get well faster. Absolutely false. This has been well studied and reported in the literature. Your infection is going to run as long as the infection and your body's defense of it lasts. That's just how it is. You're not going to knock any time off how many days of work you miss or how many days of school your little one misses if you treat their fever. Number two, a fever above 104 will cause brain damage. Now, this would be 40 degrees Celsius. This is a super common myth that many moms and dads and grandparents believe, that if the fever is above a certain magical number, then it'll just fry the brain. This has been, again, well studied, and there's no danger whatsoever. There's literally no medical danger from a fever unless the fever gets up to around 107, which would be 42 degrees Celsius, and stays there for many, many hours. Then maybe it's a problem. Definitely if you have a fever above 105 or 40 and a half Celsius for many, many hours, you should go ahead and consult your doctor, but it doesn't mean that you're going to benefit from taking a temperature lowering medication. Number three, fever must always be treated. Many moms believe this, many grandmothers too. There's absolutely no reason to treat a fever. A lot of people don't even really understand what a fever is. The fever is not caused by the virus or the infection. The fever is caused by your body. Your body wants you to have a fever. It's one of the main mechanisms that it uses to defend itself against a virus or a bacteria, and also one of the main mechanisms it uses to attack the virus or the bacteria. There's no reason, no medical reason whatsoever to think that you need to treat the fever. Now, there are a few cases where it's rational to treat the fever. So if you have a little one and their fever's really high and they're just miserable, they can't sleep, they're in pain, there's nothing wrong with giving them a low dose of a fever reducer to make them more comfortable. And that's fine as long as that's your motive, but I don't want you to falsely believe any of these myths. If you've got a fever and you have to give a presentation and your fever's so high you feel miserable and you just can't do it, take a fever reducer so you can do your job and be productive. There are rational reasons to lower a fever, but none of these 10 myths are that. Myth number four, the higher the fever, the more severe or serious the illness. This is, again, untrue, well proven to be untrue. Especially in young children, they can run astoundingly high fevers with only just a very minor infection. Now, typically, as you get older as an adult, you won't run as high of a fever as you did when you were a little kid. But how high the fever is truly has nothing to do with the severity of your illness. Myth number five, a fever should be broken as quickly as possible. I think this harkens back to myth number one, that if you catch the fever soon enough, you won't be sick for as many days. You'll get well sooner. There's no research that supports this whatsoever. There's no benefit to breaking a fever quickly. Remember, the fever is your body's first defense mechanism and first weapon of offense against the infection. Don't think you're doing your body any benefits or any favors by breaking the fever or lowering the fever. Myth number 6, ice baths or Cold compresses are the best way to lower a fever if you don't want to take a fever reducing medication. Again, untrue. What's going to happen is if you put someone with a fever in an ice bath or you use a cold cloth to wipe them down with, is they're going to shiver. Shivering is one of the best ways your body has of raising your body temperature. If you'd like to use this method of fever lowering, which works very well, you should use lukewarm water, which means about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Celsius. So just a little bit warmer than skin temperature, because then what's going to happen is the water is going to evaporate, which cools the skin, which cools the body, but it's not going to make the patient shiver, which is going to actually raise their body temperature. Number 7, children. Young children with high fevers are at risk of febrile seizures. Many mothers and grandmothers are terrified that if they let their little one have a fever, especially a higher fever, that it might make them have a seizure. Again, this has been well studied and documented in the pediatric literature. It has nothing to do with how high the fever is. The only thing they were able to tease out in the research is that if the fever elevates quickly, so not how high it is, but how quickly it goes up, that's probably the key to a child having a febrile seizure. Now, none of us want our child to have a seizure caused by a fever or any other cause, but a good thing to remember as a parent is febrile seizures are not damaging. Okay, definitely if your child has a high fever then has a seizure, take them to the doctor, take them to the emergency department. But that's all. 99.9% of the time there's no long-term sequela from that. They recover completely and they don't go on to have a seizure disorder. This is just one of the many scare tactics that certain companies who sell certain medications that do certain things to fever like to keep putting out there into the mythos, and parents pick up on it. They're terrified by it, and therefore they use more fever lowering medication. Myth number 8, if the fever doesn't come down with fever lowering medication, that means something is seriously wrong. Now, while this can rarely be true, the vast majority of the time this is not true whatsoever. Illness is caused by some infections, some viruses are just resistant to fever reducing medications, and no matter how much and how often you give it, the fever is just not going to come down. That's when you start using the lukewarm wet cloth. But this does not mean, oh my God, they've got some terrible illness because the fever didn't respond to the fever medication. And indeed, many parents use this as a cutoff as to whether to go to A&E or to the ER, is if their child doesn't respond to the fever medication. That is very rarely a sign that there's something really dangerous going on. Myth number 9, a fever should always be treated with a round of antibiotics. This is probably the most damaging of all 10 of these myths. 95% of infections that cause a fever are caused by viruses. Almost any infection you can think of, whether it's a sore throat, a sinus infection, an earache, bronchitis, any infection like that, 95% of the time it's caused by a virus. And as long as the fever is not so high that it's making you literally miserable, there's no need to take a fever reducing medication. And definitely no need to take a round of antibiotics. And myth number 10, a fever that lasts longer than a day or two is dangerous. Again, completely false. This has been well studied and documented for decades now. If you have a viral infection, which is by far the most common cause of a fever, it's going to last from 3 to 7 days. The febrile part of it usually lasts anywhere from 3 to 5 days. So if your 2-day cutoff, if that's your limit, is like if this fever lasts more than 2 days, we're going to A&E or the ER, then you're making an unnecessary trip. There is a cutoff day that you should say, this fever's lasting a little longer than it should. We maybe should go see a doctor. That's 5 to 7 days. If it lasts that long, then you're not being irrational if you go see your primary care doctor or an urgent care center. But to think that a fever is going to be gone in a day or two it's a myth. It's not true, and it's going to wind up causing you to have higher medical expenses and more logistical problems because you're going to the doctor more often. Now, I really hope this video helped you understand these myths about fever and why you shouldn't worry and why you definitely shouldn't break out the Tylenol or the Motrin every time somebody has a little bit of a fever. It's great for profits, but it's not really so great for your health, and it could actually prolong how long the infection lasts in the person you love, because remember, the fever is what your body's using to combat the infection. So if you reduce it, the infection's liable to last another day or 2 or 3 longer. You don't want that. So if the fever is manageable, if the fever is not over 105 or 40.5 Celsius, if the fever doesn't last more than 5 days, if you're like, yeah, I feel miserable, but it's not ungodly, I can tolerate it, don't take a fever reducing medication. You wind up putting yourself at risk from all of the potential side effects of the medication with no real benefit. 99.9% of the time, you're getting no benefit from reducing your fever when you have an infection, and you are most assuredly prolonging how long the infection lasts. Now, I've got another video on this channel about antibiotics and antibiotic misuse and myths around antibiotics. I'll pop it up right here at the end of this video if you want to watch it. This is Dr. Berry. Don't fall for the myths. I'll see you next time.